The year is 1516. Burgundy, a land known for its fertile fields and bountiful harvests, finds itself under siege, not by armies or warring factions, but by a relentless, buzzing horde. A swarm of locusts, so vast it darkens the sky, has descended upon the countryside, leaving behind a trail of devastation and despair. For Jean Favier, like so many others in the region, the locusts are not merely a nuisance, they are a harbinger of ruin. His entire livelihood, the fruits of months of backbreaking labor, has been consumed in a matter of days. The wheat he toiled to cultivate, the grain that would feed his family through the long winter, is gone. Each locust, seemingly insignificant on its own, is a tiny engine of destruction. Multiplied by millions, they form an unstoppable force, capable of stripping bare entire fields in a matter of hours. Their hunger is insatiable, their appetite boundless. Despair settles over the village of Saulieu like a shroud. Fearful whispers replace the usual cheerful chatter. The laughter of children is replaced by the anxious cries of their parents. The specter of famine looms large, casting a long shadow over the once thriving community. Driven to desperation, Jean Favier rallies his fellow villagers. They gather in the town square, their faces etched with worry and resolve to seek help from the authorities. They know that without intervention, they face starvation. They agree to make a plea to the local bailiff. Jean, along with a small delegation of villagers, presents their case to the local bailiff. They describe the devastation wrought by the locusts, their voices filled with urgency and despair. They beg for assistance, for some form of relief from their plight. The bailiff listens impassively, his expression unreadable. The bailiff, while sympathetic to their plight, explains that his authority is limited. He can offer no practical assistance, no material aid. He suggests that their only recourse is to appeal to a higher power, to seek the intervention of the church. With heavy hearts, the villagers turn to the church. They gather in the village church, seeking solace and guidance in their hour of need. They pray for deliverance, for an end to the locust plague that threatens to consume them. Jean Favier, representing the village, is granted an audience with Bishop Bartholomew de Try. He recounts the devastation, emphasizing not only the loss of crops but also the potential loss of tithes to the church if the famine takes hold. The bishop listens with a grave expression, weighing the implications of the crisis. Bishop Bartholomew de Try, moved by the villagers' plight and the potential implications for the church, announces his decision. He declares that a formal ecclesiastical trial will be held to determine the fate of the locusts. The villagers look on with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The wheels of the church are set in motion. A formal decree is issued, summoning the locusts to stand trial before God and the ecclesiastical court. It is a desperate measure, a testament to the extraordinary circumstances facing the community. To defend the indefensible, to represent the voiceless, Bishop Bartholomew de Try calls upon Bartholomew Chassanet. The renowned jurist, known for his sharp intellect and unconventional approach to the law, accepts the impossible task of defending the locusts. He prepares to embark on a legal battle unlike any he has ever faced, a trial that will challenge the very foundations of law, religion, and the relationship between humanity and the natural world. The despair hung heavy in the air. The relentless swarm had devoured their livelihoods, leaving behind barren fields and hollow hopes. Jean Favier, though young, possessed the resolve of his forefathers. He held high the villagers' petition, a desperate plea for divine intervention. Each farmer bore the weight of their loss. Their petition, sealed with tearful prayers and desperate hopes, represented their last chance at salvation. It was addressed to Bishop Bartholomew de Try, the shepherd of their souls. Bishop Bartholomew de Try, seated upon his throne, received the petition. His gaze swept over the parchment, his expression unreadable. The fate of Burgundy's farmers rested upon his decision. The bishop considered the implications. Piety demanded he alleviate his flock's suffering. But the tithes, the church's sustenance, were equally vital. Famine threatened both body and soul. Political considerations also weighed heavily. A starving populace was a restless populace. Order needed to be maintained, authority preserved. Action was required, and it needed to be decisive. "We shall convene a trial," Bishop de Try announced to his assembled clergy, his voice resonating with authority. "A trial to determine the fate of these locusts, and to restore peace to our troubled land." The decree was drafted, each word carefully chosen. A formal ecclesiastical trial was to be held. The locusts would be summoned, judged, and, if found guilty, punished. The news spread like wildfire. Hope flickered in the hearts of the villagers. The church, it seemed, was on their side, but a seed of unease also took root. Could such a trial truly succeed? The selection of the defense counsel became a matter of crucial importance. Someone with legal expertise, but also, perhaps, a touch of eccentricity. Someone willing to undertake the impossible. The name of Bartholomew Chasseneuil was mentioned. A renowned jurist, known for his meticulous approach and unconventional tactics. A man who relished a challenge, no matter how improbable. Bishop de Try, after careful consideration, extended the invitation. Chasseneuil was summoned to defend the indefensible. The fate of the locusts, and perhaps more, rested in his hands. Chasseneuil, ever the contrarian, accepted. A flicker of intellectual curiosity sparked in his gray eyes. The game was afoot. He would defend the locusts, not because he believed in their innocence, but because the law demanded it. Bartholomew Chasseneuil, a jurist of considerable renown, though some whispered eccentricity, found himself increasingly sought after in matters both mundane and extraordinary. His legal mind, sharp as any honed blade, was matched only by an unorthodox approach that often left his contemporaries bewildered. The delegation, led by a particularly agitated farmer, practically spilled into his study. Their words tumbled over each other in a torrent of desperation, tales of ravaged crops and impending famine. Their request, however, was far from ordinary. "They want me to defend the locusts?" Chasseneuil asked, the words feeling alien even to his own ears. Jean Favier, the farmer, nodded fervently, his sun-weathered face pleading. "Who else will speak for us?" Initially, Chasseneuil balked. The notion was absurd, bordering on blasphemous. To defend creatures deemed a plague, a scourge upon the land, went against all sense and reason. He tried to dismiss them, citing his prior commitments, his lack of expertise in entomological law. Yet a seed of curiosity had been planted. He recalled whispers of ancient texts, accounts of trials held for animals, creatures accused of transgressions against man. The sheer audacity of such proceedings piqued his interest. He began to research, poring over dusty volumes, seeking any precedent, any legal footing upon which to base a defense. He examined the locusts themselves, noting their anatomy, their behavior, searching for a motive beyond simple instinct. Days turned into nights as Chasseneuil wrestled with the ethical and legal implications of the case. Could creatures driven by instinct truly be held accountable under human law? Did they not, in their own way, have a right to exist? He summoned Jean Favier back to his chambers. "I will take your case," he announced, his voice resonating with a newfound determination. "But understand, I do this not out of expectation of victory, but in the pursuit of justice, however unconventional." Chassanet saw it as a unique opportunity to explore the boundaries of law and morality, to challenge the prevailing notions of justice and responsibility. He would delve into the depths of natural law, arguing that even the lowliest of creatures had a place in the grand tapestry of existence. He began drafting his arguments, a whirlwind of legal jargon and philosophical musings. He would argue that the locusts acted out of primal need, driven by instinct, not malice. He would challenge the very notion of holding animals accountable under human law. He knew the road ahead would be arduous, fraught with skepticism and ridicule. But Bartholomew Chassanet, the advocate for the insects, was prepared to face the storm. The trial of the locusts was about to begin. News of Chassanet's acceptance of the case reached Bishop Bartholomew de Try, who observed the unfolding events with a mixture of bemusement and concern. The trial, he knew, would be unlike any other. The task before Chassanet was daunting. Defending a swarm of locusts required more than legal acumen. It demanded a deep dive into the annals of history and philosophy. He spent countless hours poring over ancient texts, seeking precedent for holding animals accountable under human law. He recalled the accounts of animal trials from centuries past: pigs punished for infanticide, dogs accused of theft. These were not mere curiosities, but potential footholds in his defense. He needed to establish that animals, even insects, were subject to some form of legal consideration. Chassanet began to formulate his arguments. Central to his defense was the concept of natural law, the idea that all creatures, including locusts, were governed by inherent instincts and drives. They were simply acting according to their nature, driven by hunger and the need to survive. He drew inspiration from Gratian's Decretum, a cornerstone of canon law. Within its pages, he found echoes of the idea that justice should be tempered with mercy, even for those who transgressed against human interests. Could this principle be extended to the locusts? He also visited the ravaged fields, witnessing firsthand the devastation wrought by the swarm. But instead of seeing only destruction, he saw an ecosystem disrupted, a natural order thrown out of balance. He believed that humanity had a role to play in restoring that balance. Returning to his study, Chassanet gathered his apprentice and outlined his strategy. He would argue that the locusts, as creatures of God, possessed inherent rights, including the right to sustenance. It was a radical notion, one that challenged the very foundations of human dominion over the natural world. News of Chassanet's unconventional defense reached Bishop de Try. The bishop, while initially supportive of the trial, began to harbor doubts. Could Chassanet's arguments undermine the Church's authority and its role as protector of the faithful? For Jean Favier and the other farmers, Chassanet's legal theories were a distant abstraction. Their lives had been upended, their livelihoods destroyed. They wanted justice, not philosophical debates about the rights of insects. As the trial approached, Chassanet prepared to face not only the prosecution, but also the skepticism of the court and the anger of the community. He knew that his arguments would be unpopular, perhaps even heretical, but he was committed to defending the defenseless. The trial was set to begin. Bishop de Try, mindful of the potential consequences, reminded the court of its solemn duty to uphold both divine and human law. He cautioned against allowing legal technicalities to obscure the fundamental issue at hand, the devastation caused by the locusts. Jean Favier, along with other farmers, anxiously awaited the outcome. Their hopes rested on the court's ability to deliver justice and offer some measure of relief from their suffering. They watched Chassanet with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Chassanet took a deep breath and prepared to present his defense. He knew it would be an uphill battle, but he was determined to challenge the court's assumptions and to force a reconsideration of humanity's relationship with the natural world. The fate of the locusts, and perhaps something more, hung in the balance. The air in the bishop's court was thick with anticipation. Bartholomew Chassanet prepared to formally announce the commencement of the trial against the locusts. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on him, yet he maintained a professional demeanor. Bishop Bartholomew de Try observed Chassanet, his face a mask of solemnity. He hoped this unconventional trial would bring solace to his suffering flock and reaffirm the Church's authority over all creatures, great and small. Chassanet's voice resonated through the court as he read the formal summons. It commanded all locusts, present and absent, within the bishopric of Autun to appear before the court to answer for their crimes against God and the people. Jean Favier, representing the aggrieved farmers, listened intently. He wondered how such a summons could ever be delivered, and what good it could possibly do against the relentless swarm. Undeterred, Chassanet set out to serve the summons. He rode on horseback through the devastated fields, the scale of the destruction a stark reminder of the task before him. The swarm still lingered, a dark cloud constantly threatening what little remained. The air vibrated with the incessant drone of their wings, a constant reminder of the impending famine. Chassanet, standing in the middle of a barren field, raised the parchment towards the sky and in a loud voice read the summons in Latin, commanding the locusts to appear before the court. The futility of the act was apparent. From a distance, Jean Favier watched Chassanet's theatrical gesture. He couldn't help but feel a surge of skepticism. This elaborate charade seemed a far cry from the practical solutions they desperately needed. Back at the bishopric, news of Chassanet's attempts to serve the summons reached Bishop de Try. He remained impassive, carefully considering the implications of the jurist's actions. The local nobility, passing by in their ornate carriages, regarded Chassanet's efforts with a mixture of amusement and disdain. They saw the trial as a symbolic gesture, a way to appease the peasantry, rather than a genuine legal proceeding. Chassanet returned to the court, the unserved summons still in his hand. He knew the task ahead was fraught with challenges, but he remained committed to defending even the most unpopular of clients. The court awaited the next phase of the trial. The people of Burgundy held their breath, caught between desperation and disbelief, as the fate of their land hung in the balance. The trial commenced under the stern gaze of Bishop Bartholomew de Try. The prosecution, a local priest named Father Michael, wasted no time, launching into a detailed account of the devastation wrought by the locusts. Bishop de Try, a figure of imposing authority, listened with a somber expression. The weight of the community's suffering was evident in the lines etched upon his face. Jean Favier was the first to testify. His voice, roughened by years of toil under the sun, trembled slightly as he recounted the events of the past weeks. "They came like a dark cloud," Jean explained, his voice rising with emotion. "They blotted out the sun, and in a matter of hours everything was gone. Our crops, our livelihoods, everything." Chassanet watched Jean intently, his sharp gray eyes missing nothing. He scribbled furiously, noting the details of the farmer's testimony. Other villagers followed, each echoing Jean's sentiments. A young woman, her face stained with tears, presented a handful of withered wheat stalks, the skeletal remains of her family's harvest. The prosecution presented tangible evidence: withered crops, soil samples demonstrating the extent of the damage, and grim financial records detailing the farmer's losses. Bishop de Trai's expression grew sterner with each account of devastation. The collective anguish of his flock weighed heavily upon him. When the prosecution concluded their presentation, Chassanet rose. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. It was his turn. Chassanet approached Jean Favier. "Tell me, Monsieur Favier," he began, his voice calm and measured, "did you attempt to scare the locusts away? Did you try any methods to protect your crops?" Chassanet probed further, seeking to understand the specific circumstances of the infestation. His questions were precise, designed to expose any potential weaknesses in the prosecution's case. The villagers watched with a mixture of anger, despair, and a hint of morbid curiosity. Chassanet's defense was, to say the least, unorthodox. They wondered if he truly believed he could defend the indefensible. Chassanet rose, the silence in the court amplifying the rustle of his robes. He addressed Bishop de Trai and the assembled onlookers, his voice resonating with conviction, ready to commence his defense. "My lords," Chassanet began, "we must consider the nature of these creatures. They act on instinct, driven by hunger, a force as natural as the sun that ripens our crops. Can we truly condemn them for following their inherent nature?" A murmur rippled through the room. Jean Favier, his face etched with worry, shifted uncomfortably. The image of his ruined fields was fresh in his mind. Chassanet raised his hand, silencing the growing unrest. "Are we to condemn an entire species for the actions of a few? Is collective guilt a just principle? I submit that it is not. We apply human laws to creatures that know nothing of our laws or our concepts of right and wrong. Is this truly justice, or is it merely an exercise of our own power?" Chassanet questioned, his voice echoing through the chamber. Bishop de Trai observed Chassanet, his expression betraying nothing of his thoughts. The bishop was a shrewd man, and he recognized the legal complexities of the arguments presented. Chassanet unfurled a scroll, revealing crude drawings. "Consider, my lords, the actions of humankind. We clear forests, divert rivers, and alter the very landscape to suit our needs. Do we not also cause destruction on a grand scale?" Jean Favier stared at the images, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He had never considered the broader impact of human actions on the environment. "We must manage our environment responsibly, not simply condemn those who share it with us. Surely, a more enlightened approach is required," Chassanet implored. Bishop de Trai stroked his chin, his mind wrestling with Chassanet's words. The arguments were unsettling, challenging the very foundations of their understanding. A tense silence filled the courtroom. Chassanet stood firm, awaiting the court's judgment, knowing that the fate of the locusts, and perhaps something more profound, hung in the balance. Bishop de Trai rose from his throne, his face solemn. The moment of judgment had arrived. The courtroom held its breath, awaiting the pronouncement that would seal the fate of the swarm. The court adjourned. The fate of the locusts now rested in the hands of Bishop Bartholomew de Trai and his council of advisors. The weight of their decision pressed down on the stone walls of the deliberation chamber. Outside, Chassanet paced, the arguments he had so carefully constructed replaying in his mind. He knew the odds were stacked against him, but the principle of the matter burned within him. The debate within the chamber was fierce. Some advisors argued for leniency, citing Chassaignet's points about natural law and the locusts' inherent drive to survive. Others, more numerous, saw the locusts as agents of the devil, a punishment sent by God for the sins of the people. In the village square, the anxious farmers waited. Jean Favier and his neighbors huddled together, their livelihoods hanging in the balance, dependent on the outcome of a trial that seemed both absurd and terrifyingly real. Bishop de Try listened patiently, weighing each argument. He was a man of the church, but also a pragmatist. He understood the desperation of his flock, but he also recognized the potential dangers of undermining the church's authority. The decision was not an easy one. The consequences of either outcome were significant. A lenient verdict could be seen as a sign of weakness, an invitation to further transgressions against the community. A harsh sentence, while satisfying to the farmers, could raise uncomfortable questions about the limits of earthly justice. Hours passed. The debate continued, fueled by religious fervor, practical concerns, and the growing awareness that their decision would set a precedent, for better or worse. Finally, Bishop de Try raised his hand, silencing the room. He had reached a decision. The doors to the court chamber opened, and Chassaigne was summoned back inside. He entered, his heart pounding, unsure of what awaited him. The courtroom was packed. The farmers, their faces etched with worry, strained to hear the pronouncement that would determine their fate. Bishop de Try stood, his face solemn. "We have deliberated," he announced, his voice echoing through the courtroom, "and we have reached a verdict. The locusts, for their unrepentant destruction of God's bounty, are hereby excommunicated from this diocese." Chassaigne lowered his head. He had failed. The locusts were condemned, and the delicate balance between humanity and nature remained precarious. He knew this was not the end. The bishop, after days of deliberation with his council, reconvened the court. The air was thick with anticipation, a silent question hanging over the assembled villagers and clergy. Would the unorthodox arguments of Chassaigne sway the church, or would tradition and the desperate needs of the people prevail? Chassaigne, despite knowing the likely outcome, maintained his composure. He had presented his case, argued for the rights of even the smallest creatures, and planted seeds of doubt in the minds of some. That, in itself, was a victory of sorts. Jean Favier, representing the ravaged farmers, could barely contain his impatience. For him, this trial was not an intellectual exercise. It was a matter of survival. He needed a resolution, a promise of protection against the insatiable swarm. With solemn gravitas, Bishop de Try declared the court's decision. The words reverberated through the silent hall. "We find the accused, the swarm of locusts infesting the lands of Burgundy, guilty of transgressions against God and man." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Chassaigne remained impassive, acknowledging the inevitable. The sentence was to be excommunication, the severing of the locusts' connection to the church, and by extension, to the protection of God. For Jean Favier and the other farmers, the excommunication offered a glimmer of hope. It was a symbolic act, perhaps, but one that resonated deeply with their faith and their belief in the power of the church. The formal ceremony of excommunication began. Bishop de Try, assisted by his clergy, stood before the altar, a flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the court. The ritual was steeped in tradition, a solemn pronouncement of spiritual banishment. A priest swung a censer, releasing plumes of incense that swirled through the air, carrying with them the weight of the church's condemnation. The Latin chants echoed through the hall, a lament for the broken harmony between humanity and nature. Bishop de Try read from a prepared scroll, his voice resonating with the full authority of the church. He declared the Locusts excommunicated, banished from the spiritual community, and stripped of any divine protection. The villagers watched with a mixture of hope and trepidation. They clung to the belief that this act, though seemingly symbolic, would somehow alleviate their plight. The excommunication was a tangible sign that the church was on their side, fighting against the forces that threatened their existence. Chassanet observed the ceremony with a thoughtful expression. He knew that the excommunication would not magically eradicate the locusts, but it might offer the farmers a psychological boost, a renewed sense of hope in the face of despair. And perhaps, just perhaps, it would spark a wider conversation about humanity's relationship with the natural world. As the ceremony concluded, Bishop de Try blessed the crowd. The excommunication was complete. The fate of Burgundy and the effectiveness of this unusual judgment remained to be seen. The people could only hope that divine intervention, coupled with their own efforts, would deliver them from the plague of locusts. With the pronouncement of excommunication, a strange stillness fell upon the land. Bishop Bartholomew de Try, despite the solemnity of the act, could not shake a nagging doubt. Had they truly accomplished anything beyond a symbolic gesture? For Jean Favier and his fellow farmers, life continued much as before. The excommunication had not magically restored their crops, nor had it driven away the remaining locusts. The practical impact was, to put it mildly, non-existent. Unfazed, the locusts continued their relentless consumption, driven by instinct and heedless of the pronouncements of the church. The swarm, as a collective, remained stubbornly unrepentant. Bartholomew Chassanet, back in the quiet solitude of his study, pondered the implications of the trial. The excommunication was a foregone conclusion, yet the legal arguments he presented had, he hoped, planted seeds of doubt. In the villages and towns of Burgundy, the trial became a subject of heated debate. Some mocked Chassanet's efforts, deeming them absurd and heretical. Others, however, saw a glimmer of reason in his unconventional defense. Bishop de Try, aware of the growing unrest, used his sermons to reinforce the church's authority and to remind his parishioners of the divine order. Yet, even he couldn't entirely dismiss the questions raised by Chassanet's defense. Chassanet continued to study the locusts, not as a lawyer defending his clients, but as a scholar seeking to understand the intricate web of nature and the place of humanity within it. The trial of the locusts entered the annals of legal history, a curious footnote in the ongoing debate about the rights of animals and the limits of human jurisdiction. Seasons turned. Slowly, painstakingly, the land began to heal. Farmers like Jean Favier replanted their fields, driven by an unyielding hope for a better future. Chassanet continued his legal career, his defense of the locusts becoming a legendary tale told to his students. He taught them not just the letter of the law, but also the importance of questioning its application and considering the perspectives of all, even the smallest of creatures. Centuries later, legal scholars would continue to analyze the case of the excommunicated locusts, debating the merits of Chassanet's arguments and the broader implications for environmental ethics and animal rights. The story of the locust serves as a timeless reminder of the complex relationship between humanity and the natural world, a testament to our enduring quest for justice, and a poignant reflection on the limits of our understanding.